Yeah.
What are the worst mobility exercises that you see people doing?
The 90-90, when you're have 5 degrees of hip internal rotation is at the top of the list. Like for some reason, the 90-90 has become the standard or the thought of like, this is mobility, and it's a great exercise. It's a great base position. The options are endless, and I use it all the time. But when you first start off and you don't know how to lift your big toe, you can't really do a hip car, you don't really have any hip extension, and then you put yourself in this really advanced position, it's like just the progress is so slow and the chance for actually going backwards is really high. So that would be the first one.
Would you say that that person should start standing, doing hip cars, single leg hip cars before? And then how do you feel about 90-90s while hands behind you? Because that's usually where I start, where you're not totally upright, that your hands are back behind you. So that way you can kind of let that, like you're not in as deep of an angle.
Absolutely. It's definitely way better. But in my experience, what I would do is standing hip cars and just spending more time on that would be better. But that's really the beauty of it, is like the positions are kind of on a continuum, right? Whereas the 90-90 would be the highest on that continuum. It's the furthest along the line. So yeah, regressing it would put you further back on the continuum, but there's probably a figure 4 for external rotation that would be better. There's a side lying hip IR that would be better for internal rotation. So I would just probably regress those positions even more. And that's not to say that what we're talking about too is like the fastest path. Because in my opinion, like you can hammer that's the other thing about the mobility trainers, like you can hammer away at it forever, like you can hammer away for 3 years. Your body's gonna adapt. It's gonna fold some way for sure. And you're gonna get changes. But I found a way faster way where you would get those changes and more in way less time. And that would go with something like that with a regression, where they're maybe focusing on their hip cars more. Maybe I put them in the 90-90, but they lean back and they just do transitions, but they don't necessarily stay there for pails and rails and do isometrics there and do lift offs and all that other stuff. Like the lift your back foot for hip IR lift off is another one that, like, yeah, it's a great exercise, but like we just talked about people hiking up their hip and rolling forward. What's someone going to do as soon as you get them in there? They just hike forward and roll out of the way. So it's like, oh, so the compensation I'm trying to avoid in your assessment, I'm programming in my intervention. Well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. You know what I mean? So yeah, that would be the biggest one that I see. And yeah, that would probably be the biggest one. Just in general, just starting too far along and not spending enough time on the basics, which I think is kind of a microcosm of fitness in general, right?
Totally.
Yeah, for
Right.
sure.
You said that it's that they want the fastest path. So like the 90-90 is like the quintessential, thing, and really like complex, and you get a lot of bang for your buck, especially if you're already able to get into the range. But if you're not, then where do you start? And yeah, a very good point. I always think of it like a bow and arrow. Like you got to pull back in order to spring forward, baby.
Yeah. And even the 90-90, you can put blocks in it, you can lean back. Like there's regressions, but like you rarely ever see those.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had countless clients that like early on, I put them in the 90-90 for so long. I just kept thinking to myself, like, once you retest, like, why isn't this person getting that much better? Like, yeah, they feel better, but they're not really getting better in the measurable things that I'm supposed to be going after. And I realized it was because that position was too advanced for them. And it's just, they needed something else. And then once they got something else, they took off and they made so much more progress. And it was like, oh, this is what I needed to do.
Right. Regression for progression.